In the remote reaches of the Icelandic highlands, the line between ancient spiritual practice and the later accusations of sorcery remains blurred by the passage of time. Here, the rituals of the past were slowly reshaped by a changing faith, leaving behind a legacy of hidden pacts and whispered secrets. What became of the old ways when the shadows of the new world fell upon them? Let us first listen to the story.
Just a reminder, everything you see on this channel is AI generated. All info should be regarded as entertainment, not facts. Now let's listen to the story.
Listen close, for the old ways still hide in the stone. The land remembers the pacts made in secret. In the highlands they met in shadows. They spoke to powers that walked the earth before the cross came. They sought forbidden strength, trading their souls for mastery over the seasons and the very soil beneath their feet. The ground took their secrets. Even when the new god arrived, the old shadows remained in the mountain's deep heart. They met in the high places where the wind bites deep. They gathered in the shadows to weave pacts with the hidden one. The elders spoke of those who traded their souls for heavy secrets. They walked the paths where the old ways still lingered. They were not mere neighbors anymore. They became agents of a dark force, seeking out a world that did not belong to us. The law of the land shifted, but the spirit of the crime remained. They served a master that knew no mercy. When you hear the word, do not think of stories. Know it as a debt that was paid in blood and bone. They would gather where the wind howls the loudest, deep in the high country, marking the earth with secret. They walked where the law of man could not reach them. The men spoke of shadows that took shape in the mist. They knew those who stepped into the gray were making pacts with the forces that moved beneath the soil. In the high places, those who practiced the old ways were branded as agents of a terrible hidden power. They were not just neighbors, they were chosen vessels for chaos. But the path between the old ways and the new was never a straight road. The change of the faith was a slow weaving of spirits and blood into a new skin. The roots go deep, twisting even as the names of the magic change. They took what was old and forged it into a weapon of the new shadows to hunt the stray. They sought the ones who traveled to the high places, where the earth is empty and the wind carries the weight of old secrets. These people walked alone where few dared tread. When the law grew sharp and the new faith became a wall of iron, they looked for any sign of the old ways. They watched for those who spoke to things unseen. The inspectors came to the small farms, searching for the hidden marks and the whispered words that did not belong in a land now governed by the shepherd's rules. They hunted the different. They gathered those they believed had woven their lives into the old, forbidden paths. In the cold silence of the high country, they believed these people had traded their safety for power. You must listen well, child. The shadows of those who walked those paths still linger in the stones. When you hear the wind rise, it is the memory of what was lost. They did not simply walk into the dark. They sought the high places, the desolate plateaus where the veil thinned, to forge pacts with powers that demanded a heavy price. In those secret meetings, they traded their peace for the ability to bend the world. They became agents of a power that was never meant for mortal hands to hold. When the new laws came to our land, the old ways did not vanish. They hid in the shadows of the mountain, waiting for a name to be given to their power. The laws sought to crush the soul of the old ways, naming them as dark deeds. But the land remembered the ancient whispers that preceded the cross and the law. Do not go to the high places alone, for those who once walked there with others in the shadows remain, and they do not welcome those who search for their secret.
Moving beyond the whispers of old modern scholarship reveals a complex reality. The transition from the Norse beliefs of the past to the structured persecutions of the later era was not a simple line, but a nuanced layering of faith and fear across the centuries. Archaeological evidence specifically shows that burial rites in the Viking-age did not shift instantly with the arrival of Christianity. These physical records suggest that local traditions persisted long after the official shift in religion, creating a long period of overlapping cultural practices. While a broader European heartland saw a peak of witch hunting between 1560 and 1630, the motivations were often driven by political and social governance. These trials were sometimes used as mechanisms to enforce religious control and manage perceived threats of supernatural conspiracy. Because the transition was nonlinear, the line between folk tradition and legal prosecution remains blurred. Contemporary research focuses on these ambiguities, seeking to separate the lived experiences of the people from the formal, often terrified, interpretations of the law that eventually defined the era. While the commoner feared the shadow of the forest, the law sought the stain of the soul. In the coastal villages, the line between old ways and new fears began to blur and fade. The distinction between the old magic of the Vikings and the trials of the church remains clouded. Scholars look for the point where Seidr became the sorcery of the law's fear. Because the transition from the old faith to the new was not a straight path, the records do not tell us exactly when the ancient spirit was branded as a transgression of the law. In this historical fog, we find the gap between what the people practiced and what the authorities prosecuted. It is a space where memory remains, but the truth of the transition stays veiled in shadow. As the centuries turned, the land began to hold different meanings. The transition from old ways to the new faith was not a sudden spark, but a slow, irregular blending of shadows and light. Between the Viking-age and the modern era lies the mystery of Seidr. Scholars struggle to pinpoint the exact moment these local traditions were redefined by the rigid structures of the later ecclesiastical courts. The records of those later trials became instruments of governance, casting a new veil over the old. What began as a local belief became a legal and religious mechanism for controlling the social order. Today, we must walk carefully through these archives. The gap between the ancient practice of Seidr and the prosecution of witchcraft remains a silent corridor, where the truth of the transformation stays veiled in shadow.